Deep Sea Embers Chapter 161 to 170. Chapter 161 inches another connection. In the eyes of the owner of this doll house, the world's most outstanding puppeteer was a human named Lucretia Abnomar, the daughter of the famous Captain Duncan. As soon as the old lady uttered these words, the entire store had fallen quiet for several seconds. It wasn't until Duncan issued an earth-shattering cough did it break. Oomph, oomph. Customer, are you okay? This reaction took the shopkeeper by surprise. Just like every elf who has been dealing with short-lived races for a long time, her face instantly showed an expression of worrying about the sudden death of the human in front. Do you need me to ask for a doctor? Ahem, I'm fine. Duncan finally stopped coughing, but it took a while before he could finish the sentence. I accidentally choked on my own saliva. What did you just say? Lucretia Abnomar, the mistress of the Bright Star, one of Captain Duncan's children, the shopkeeper said with an expression of someone not understanding the big fuss. The world's most outstanding puppeteer. It was very hard for Duncan to regain his breath, but after this second burst from the old lady, he choked hard to the point that his face went red. At the same time on the deck of the Vanished, Alice, who had just been frightened by Duncan's violent coughing, was now startled by the other party's sudden and chaotic cursing. Are you okay, Captain? Miss Doll asks with a worried face. I'm fine, Duncan gasped, trying hard to calm his swirling mood that's been flipped upside down. Managing two bodies at once was not a simple thing. If he suddenly gets hit with a shock, it does affect his ability to control their bodily functions. Go to the cabin first with the grocery. I have something to deal with. Are you really sure you're alright? Alice still looked skeptical and didn't feel right to leave the captain alone. Do you want me to check your body or massage your back or something? Do you know how? N-O-V-E in .c ohm. No, I don't. Ads by PubFuture. Then go. Oh, okay. Finally sending away the unreliable puppet away, Duncan quickly refocused his mind back to the city where he was facing an incredible adversary of innocent ignorance. You mean that famous Captain Duncan? The legendary captain of the Vanished? Shish. Don't just say the name. The store owner quickly interrupted Duncan's words. Ordinary people like you don't know, but just pronouncing the name of that great horror will bring a curse upon yourself. You better be careful, otherwise that ship might just visit you in your dreams. You're right, Duncan choked again, trying to endure the strange feeling in his heart, that captain, not only does he have a daughter named Lucretia, but also a son. Yes, I met them 100 years ago. The son is called Tyrion Abnomar and later became a general under the Frost Queen. Sadly, it wasn't long before the Frostbite Rebellion took place and pulled that kid into piracy. The daughter did better though. Lucretia Abnomar eventually became known as the most outstanding puppeteer back then. The old lady chattered and finally paused to sigh again, but this is some old story now. Many humans wouldn't even remember such a thing. Few in planned like to discuss affairs related to that ship, let alone the children of that captain. But in my opinion, that's just wrong. Those two kids are doing fine and living a life of the sea as their own ship captain. Wait a minute. Duncan immediately widened his eyes. You said they are still alive. Alive? Yes, alive. It is said that they were cursed by subspace and became immortals. The old lady heaved another sigh. It is estimated that they can live longer than me. Duncan, are you really all right? The old lady of the shop finally couldn't help but ask again. I see that your face has not been quite right since I brought up the topic. Maybe I should drop the matter and talk about something else. No, please go on. I love to hear more. Duncan immediately cut in and pushed himself to regain his composure with burning heat in his eyes. Tell me more about those siblings. You said you met them before. A century ago, the old woman said slowly with a tone of reminiscence. I had only just opened shop on this street back then when the brother and sister came in. Lucretia bought a 3-point doll from me, and Tyrion paid for it when they were young. Their father at the time was still normal too. Oh my bad, we mustn't mention him. No. Ads by PubFuture. Then more than 10 years later, I met Lucretia alone again on my way to Lanza to communicate with my colleagues. By that time, she had already become an outstanding puppeteer and mechanic. Her clockwork-driven puppet is something that even I can't make. The shopkeeper chattered again, talking about life stories that were history to most of humanity. It seems that regardless of race, Older people have the habit of reminiscing the past like it's some fond memory. Duncan's choppy mind still hadn't calmed down, but his expression had flattened out to avoid giving the wrong impression. Tyrion Abnomar was loyal to the Frost Queen. About half a century ago, not too far back. Some of the older humans still remember the event, the shopkeeper said casually, but it is only hearsay at most. Back then, the northern states were relatively closed off, so the information we got down in planned is limited. Duncan felt his heart pounding. Of course he knew who the Frost Queen was, and he even had a one-to-one Frost Queen doll jumping up and down on his ship. Still, he never could have imagined that the queen who had been executed by the rebels half a century ago would make another connection with him in such a way, through a firstborn, who even he had just learned of their existence. The Frostbite Rebellion half a century ago, he pondered, trying to appear like an ordinary gossip-loving guest. I've seen it in the history books, but it's not clear. That incident is a mystery to begin with. The shopkeeper waved her hand. It is said that it is related to that ship. Who would dare record it clearly? Tyrion Abnomar went on to become a pirate after the Frostbite Rebellion. Duncan asked again. He's still active on the other side of the cold sea. It seems to be, the shopkeeper recalled. Anyway, I only heard this saying from a peer 20 years ago after they conducted business in the north. Then, are the siblings still speaking? How do I know? The shopkeeper waved her hand. I'm just an ordinary old lady who opened a shop on the streets of Planned. At most, my connection with those two is that I met them earlier in my years. You're right, Duncan grumbled at his own silliness. He's clearly assuming too much. Ah, by the way, speaking of Lucretia, I suddenly remembered something. It has been here for many years. Maybe you're interested, the old woman says after getting a light bulb. Without waiting for the man to speak, she promptly walked behind the stairs and rummaged inside the storage room. From it, she pulled out a half-meter-long box from the deepest parts and placed it on the counter. This is, Duncan looked warily at the old dusty box. A doll, the old woman kindly answered as she carefully opened the lid. Her name is Nilu. Remember what I just said? Many years ago, Lucretia and her brother bought a doll from my shop during their teen years. The doll actually came in a pair, and this is that one's sister. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 162 Inches Nilu. Duncan quietly stared at Nilu, who was placed in the box. It was just an ordinary joint doll, very much in line with the court girl style that was popular in the city-state a century ago. With beautiful golden curly hair and a lace-encrusted dress, the joints of her arms were more pronounced in an old-fashioned spherical structure than Alice's. Her face was made of ceramics, and her mouth and eyes showed the signature seam structure of old-fashioned dolls. To be fair, the doll was so delicately crafted and well kept that it's hard to believe it's been lying in a box for a century. Although it's far from being a lifelike doll, like Alice, the little one named Nilu could also be described as beautiful. 100 years ago, Lucretia once bought another doll called Looney, who was paired with this little one from this store, and now, Nilu had come before Duncan. He didn't mean to make this encounter, but it just happened. Destiny was a wonderful thing. It doesn't look like it's been preserved for a century, Duncan said thoughtfully. She's only a little bit old. Elven products have always been known for their durability. After all, we usually use them for a long time. My puppet making skills should be beyond many of my peers, and I don't want my carefully crafted children to be separated from me after only a century or two. I understand, but it's an antique in terms of human years. Duncan raised an eye only to realize this well-preserved doll wasn't some simple commodity. I don't think I can afford this. He hasn't forgotten about the profit he earned from selling the dagger to Mr. Morris and reporting the cultists, but in comparison to this beautifully crafted piece of craftsmanship, he knows it couldn't be cheap. Antique. I wasn't thinking about that until you mentioned it. The shopkeeper smiled with a pleasant expression on her chubby face. It's not expensive. In fact, if you buy that wig and matching silver hair accessory, I can sell you for 142 solas. Ads by PubFuture. This time it was Duncan's turn to be surprised. Why? Maybe it's just fate, the shopkeeper said slowly. Nilu has been lying quietly with me for so many years. I do not want her to remain lonely forever like this. Then you came along. It's rare to find someone who loves dolls as much as you do these days. So consider this fate's guidance. Fate, the corner of Duncan's mouth visibly twitched. He usually liked to use this word to fool others in his own store, but he didn't expect to have this phrase used on himself. So the real situation is that you can't sell it, right? Shopkeeper. It's fate. Because it's more or less connected with the cursed, abnormal, family, so it can't be sold at all, right? It's really just fate. Does this doll have other traits like curses? For example, will it come back if you toss it away? Or they will go to the kitchen while you are sleeping and grab the kitchen knife. The old woman's eyes finally widened, and her voice now sounded an octave higher. I specifically asked the priest to exorcise any evil spirit from it. I kept all the certificates too. Duncan chuckled. See, it's really because people suspect this doll is cursed. That's why it can't be sold, right? No-vel-b in .c ohm. Old woman. I opened an antique shop in the lower city. Duncan exhaled. An antique shop in the lower city, you get what I mean. That's why I don't like dealing with businessmen, especially those like you, the old woman grumbled and sighed. Alright, fine, it's exactly because of that reason. She keeps getting older and older. Eventually, Nilu can only sit in my storage room. If you really want her, I'll forget about giving a discount and sell you at cost for 75 solas. At least let me recover the fee for calling the priest to perform an exorcism. Ads by PubFuture. Deal. Duncan didn't wait for the other party to finish and agreed. In any case, he did have a huge interest in the doll. So even if there was no evidence of any connection between the little one and Lucretia, he figured he should buy her merely based on the fate factor alone. This was his knee-jerk reaction after learning he actually had a pair of children in this world. Perhaps the kids would one day pop up from God knows where. At that point, bringing out this twin doll would help get the conversation going. In addition, he might even be able to find a connection using this doll. After all, the supernatural of this world often delivers itself in the strangest fashion. It's not in his interest to assume too much otherwise. Then, Nilu, is yours? The old lady was a little stunned by Duncan's quick response. She's probably regretting why she didn't keep a higher price and shove the doll box forward. You have to take good care of this child. Although I can see that you are a gentleman who really loves dolls, I still want to warn you not to think of Nilu as a cheap commodity. Of course, Duncan took the wooden box, closed the lid, and then looked up at the wig and hair accessories he had just chosen. How much do those two add up? 425 solas, upfront price. Duncan now got a toothache. In the lower city, this was the living expenses of a whole family for 2 months. But in the upper city, it was only enough to buy 2 accessories for the luxury of the rich. To be honest, to say Duncan wasn't shaken was a lie. But before his wavering heart could falter, he steeled himself to pay the price. It was a gift he had promised Alice, and considering the gain he got from this doll shop today, the price seemed acceptable. After comforting himself, Duncan exhaled softly and prepared to pay the money obediently. It's just that when he was paying the money, he suddenly remembered something again and couldn't help but ask, by the way, why did Lucretia only buy Looney back then? Did she know about Nilu as a sister? Do you really want to know? When the shopkeeper heard this, she showed a slightly unfathomable expression. This matter is another secret related to the Abnomar family. Duncan subconsciously inched closer. Then I'm even more curious. Ads by PubFuture. Then settle the bill first. Duncan was taken aback by the demand but quickly adjusted his face into a smile while handing the money over. Can you tell me now? Oh, it's actually nothing, the old lady said casually while collecting the money. Those 2 children didn't have enough money back then. Lucretia was in tears when she left and said she would take Nilu with her when she had the money in the future. But from the way things look, it seems the lady had forgotten the matter. Duncan, is this old lady in front of me just special, or are all the elves in this world sick like this? Back on the Vanished, which swayed slightly due to the undulating sea, Alice had returned to the upper deck after transporting the last of the things to the cabin. Captain, Miss Doll happily leaned over at the thoughtful-looking ghost captain. I sent everything to the cabin. Ingredients and kitchenware were delivered to the kitchen. Everything else I've left to the captain's quarter. Well done. Duncan returned to his senses and sighed softly. Then focusing his eyes on the doll, "You've worked hard. Captain, how are you now?" Alice peered up at Duncan and asked hesitantly, "Your face suddenly became very strange before. Are you really okay?" Duncan shook his head. "Don't worry, just some small problem." His mind was actually still a little bit troubled over the troubles that might arise from Tyrion and Lucretia's existence. Then looking down at the cursed puppet in front of him and the connection she has with the Frost Queen, he couldn't ignore the sheer coincidence of it all. As the old saying goes, when there are too many coincidences, then it's no longer a coincidence. Heaving a long sigh, Duncan forcibly calms himself to stop the irritation. Then he turned to the resting bird on the deck and summoned her. In a flick, I burst into flame and disappeared from the ship again. Did I go to deliver goods again? Alice eyed the spot where the flame was mere seconds ago. Not much this time. Duncan nodded slightly, then looked at Alice with a hint of a smile. "It's a gift for you." Alice's eyes lit up. "Gift? A gift for me? Captain, you really?" Before Miss Doll's voice could finish, a green vortex of flame suddenly appeared above the deck to cut her off. I had completed her teleportation from planned with a new batch of materials. This time, she's carrying a wig that instantly enraptured the doll's eyes. Chapter 163 Inches Exhausted Communication. Seriously, Duncan almost thought Miss Doll was about to cry and run away based on her stoned expression. "Thank you," Alice cries in astonishment. "Duncan, you really bought me new hair." The next second, Alice's face was full of smiles as if she had received the most heartwarming gift. "I thought you were just saying it and didn't mean it last time. Mr. Goathead said the wig used by dolls are very expensive." Duncan. What he had been waiting for did not happen. No jumping with horror, no fainting from shock, not even a weep from the doll. There goes his anticipated fun. Captain, why are you in a daze again?" Alice's voice suddenly came from the side, bringing Duncan back to reality. "She's so close now that it's only inches between their noses. You've been in a daze many times today." Duncan blinked and retreated a little to gain distance. Then showing a weird and strange face, "I didn't expect you to have such a carefree heart. Weren't you quite upset when I told you about the wig? I thought you would put up a fight about using a wig." "I'm frustrated with my hair loss, but why should I be frustrated with getting new hair?" Alice blinked her eyes as if something was wrong with Duncan's view. "I'm a puppet." Duncan finally knew what the problem was. Ads by PubFuture. He had taken Alice as a human being since she looked so much like a person. Of course, there's the occasional head popping here and there, but that's dismissible due to her carefree attitude. When in reality, he should have viewed the doll as a genuine puppet. What does it matter to a puppet if they changed a wig out? Heck, it might not even matter if she changed an arm or leg. Forget it, I was overthinking this too much. Duncan facepalmed and waved his hand for her to continue. As the natural moving disaster on the boundless sea, he's no match for this wacky doll. Anyways, it's good that you like it. I like it. Alice held the wig happily and jumped around like a child. "And what about the rest?" "They're for you too." Duncan sighed, trying hard to suppress his inner complaint after seeing how visually impacting it was for an elegant Gothic doll to behave like a child. "Open it and take a look." Alice curiously opened the delicate wooden box. In there sat a set of silver hair accessories made of diamond-shaped flakes lying quietly in the velvet lining. "Last time, I took away the feather pin you found in the cabin," Duncan said lightly. "This is my present for that. See, I kept my promise." Alice was stunned for a long time. Eventually, she revealed a wide smile that overshadowed her childish antics. "Thank you, Captain. Captain, you are so nice." "Don't be so loud." Duncan couldn't help but shush her due to all the buzzing glee in his ear. "It's just a hair ornament, no need to be so excited." Not only hair accessories but also a wig. Duncan faintly flushed with embarrassment. "Don't mention it." Alice did not notice the delicate mood of the captain and fully immersed herself in the new gifts. Eventually, she finally found her eyes landing on the last wooden box on the deck. The container was about half a meter long with an elegant yet simple decoration of brass lock and hinges. In addition, the doll kept getting this strange sensation that it reminded her of her own coffin box. Ads by PubFuture. "What is this?" Alice put the wig down and curiously peered down at the thing. "I bought it from the doll house, but this one is not for you," Duncan said casually. "If you want to take a look, Go ahead and open it. Alice nodded and lifted the lid with a curious face. Immediately, the lady came face to face with her own kind inside the container. Alice. You can call her Nilu. Duncan's voice came from the side, but unlike you, she's just an ordinary doll. Probably. Alice froze for the longest time. Eventually, after nearly 10 seconds, she suddenly moved with a click-click sound before her head fell into Nilu's box. Help. Duncan sighed and lent a hand by picking up the head. With a shameful expression while screwing her back on. Do you have to behave like this every time? Alice, however, reacted much more strongly, with her face showing disbelief and sadness. Captain, you have a new doll. What nonsense are you going on about? Duncan instantly picked up on the weird vibe from those words. Without waiting, he lashed out. Didn't I say Nilu is different from you? She doesn't run or jump like you, and what do you mean by a new doll? You make it sound like I have some sort of weird fetish or something. Then why did you bring a new doll home? There's a very special reason for this. Duncan exhaled softly and got up to stare off into the sea. This doll Nilu has another sister called Looney. My daughter took Looney with her many years ago and left Nilu behind. As it so happens, I visited that shop by coincidence today, so I figured it's fate that I bring Nilu back with me. Ads by PubFuture. Duncan did not hide the information he had just learned and said it naturally. He's playing the role of Captain Duncan of the Vanished anyways, so there would be a time when they would learn of his kids. In that case, he might as well be the one to break it out. Without surprise, Alice popped her eyes in stunned shock at the captain. Captain, you have a daughter. The doll cusped her mouth in utter shock. This is the first time I've heard it. Duncan inwardly sighed, moaning that it's also his first time as well. Is this strange? I also have a son, and I haven't seen them in a century. He kept a straight face without breaking character. You still have a son. Alice nearly fainted at the repeated shock. Her eyes now widened to a tangerine size as her tongue stuttered. Then does that mean you also have a wife? Duncan. At this moment, both occupants of the ship were staring wide-eyed without anyone to answer them. I kind of regret opening this topic with you. Duncan finally broke the awkwardness and grumbled, I don't want to talk about this. Oh, okay. Alice didn't know what to say, so she just kept nodding her head. Then looking down at the new doll named Nilu, she suddenly made an enlightened face like a light bulb just went off. Does that mean the feather hairpin I found is your daughter's? C. Duncan didn't answer her. Honestly, he wasn't sure either. But based on the speculation, it's most likely as Alice said. Then he noticed the sneaking peek from Alice. Go ahead, tell me what you're thinking. I don't like it when you're acting all weird like this. It's nothing. Alice waved her hand and grew hesitant. I get the feeling you're more humanistic now. Duncan. Are you praising me? Alice was stumped for a moment until she recalled the lesson from the goat head, which caused her to make an apologetic bow. I'm sorry, Captain, I shouldn't have scolded you by calling you humanistic. Thank you. Duncan twitched in the mouth before shooing her off due to the exhaustive conversation. Take the gift and go have fun. I want some alone time. Oh, okay. Chapter 164 Inches Call No Answer. Duncan watched in silence as Alice merrily pranced off the deck. After confirming he was alone, the ghost captain shifted his main consciousness back to the second body inside planned. He needed to get it back to the shop to work on this side. Of course, Duncan made sure to get as much information out of the shopkeeper as he could. From what he learned, those two fell out with their old man at some point in the past. But what exactly was the issue? An argument? Or something much worse? At the moment, he had no way of knowing. That leaves the issue of how he should behave when they meet. Act as a kind and gentle father reuniting with his kids, or behave indifferently like in the tales. Duncan sighed softly at the options. Regardless of the real situation, one thing seems certain though, it's unlikely they are on good terms. He bent down and picked up the wooden box containing Nilu, the newest member of the Vanished. Is she really connected to Lucretia? In fact, does Lucretia still have the twin sister doll after 100 years? Duncan mused over the possibilities of that happening. He didn't think much of it when he first bought Nilu, but the speculations were running wild now that he's begun. With the box in hand, he returned to the captain's quarter. As usual, the goat head inside was waiting for him on the mapping table. Ah, the great captain has returned. You seem to have brought a lot of supplies back from the city-state. Your loyal first mate here is very concerned with the food and health of the crew. If you don't mind, I would like to personally guide Miss Alice into being a qualified. Ads by PubFuture. Quiet, don't mess with that puppet with any more of your recipes. I don't want my next meal to look like a pot of ghostly demonic vomit. Duncan glared at the goat head to warn him. Where are we now, and how far are we from planned? Oh, we're still moving towards planned at full speed, and we've had several successful spirit world accelerations in between. It's like floating in the water, on the edge of the real world, and now the vanished is only 10 days away from that city-state, Mr. Goathead immediately answered with a chirpy note. It is estimated that it will not be long before you can feel a noticeable power-up as you walk through the spirit world. The influence of the vanished will be the biggest help for your activities in the city-state. Very good, Duncan nodded in approval. With the wooden doll box in hand, he was about to head into his bedroom when he paused to ask, "Hey, how will Tyrion and Lucretia react if they see me again?" It was a test by him after careful deliberate consideration. This was the most normal, least suspicious, and informative question he could come up with. The goat head was visibly stunned for a moment, and his voice grew hesitant before answering. "You mean, your children? I'm sorry, Captain, I don't know if I should talk about your family affairs. You rarely mention them to me, but if I have to say it." Despite usually being particularly sharp-mouthed, the goat head gulped and finally continued, "If I have to say, I think there may be another battle between Tyrion and us, just like that time near the Frost City State. He does like to use artillery fire to solve his problems. As for Miss Lucretia, she'll probably get away and watch from afar." Duncan kept quiet but realized two things from the conversation. First, the goat head mentioned a battle near the Frost City State with his son. Second, he specifically emphasized that Duncan rarely mentioned the brother and sister to him. Judging from this sentence, it would indicate the statue wasn't around when the siblings were still on good terms with the father, meaning the goat head's not an original member of the Vanished. In light of the shocking revelation, Duncan's appearance showed nothing as he continued into his bedroom. Once the thick oak door finally closed with a dunt, he heaved a long deep sigh and pulled Nilu out from the box. After placing it on the table, he finally greeted the new member of his ship. "Hello, my name is Duncan." Ads by PubFuture. The doll, of course, did not respond. She's really just a joint puppet. Duncan found it silly for him to speak to a lifeless object. Fortunately, no one was around to spy on him, at least not in his personal bedroom aboard the vessel. Then with one hand, he popped open the drawer and rummaged through the content. It was a small and delicate hairpin with the shape of waves and feathers that he pulled out, the item Alice found in the lower cabin. Duncan quietly stared at the small hairpin. Like before, he got a strange sense of nostalgia permeating his heart. "From the looks of things, it's really Lucretia's," Duncan whispered. "Is it a gift that she didn't take with her, or is it the only memento she left on this ship after she left?" He slowly picked up the hairpin and flipped it gently against the limelight shining through the window. Then with a summon, a small cluster of green flame spread from his fingertips, wrapping around the trinket before extending itself to Nilu the doll as well. Using these two items, Duncan wanted to see if he could connect with his daughter remotely. However, the flames quickly faded after trying to create a line. Neither the puppet nor the hairpin reacted to his power as well. Is it because they are really just normal items, or is it due to Lucretia being too close to the border of the civilized world that my power is ineffective? Duncan frowned, spreading the flames out again and calling out with his voice this time, "Lucretia. NOVELBJN.C Ohm." Nothing happened again. This brought a wave of disappointment to Duncan. At the same time, in the distant borderland near the eternal curtain, the clockwork doll, Looney, who was busy wiping the table abruptly froze. Then her gears and bearings started to rotate wildly, followed by the grinding sound of something going terribly wrong inside before the key behind her back popped out of the keyhole with fizzled green smoke spewing out of the seams. Chapter 165 Inches Lucretia's Pressure. Accompanied by a series of weird noises, the clockwork figure completely stiffened and stopped like a rusted machine without a soul. Almost at that exact moment, Lucretia, who was in a nearby cabin, noticed the abnormality of her creation and became alarmed. Without delay, the door slammed open with stacks of flying paper whirlwinding out of the room. It eventually found its way over to the clockwork doll and reformed into the form of the sea witch. Loony. Lucretia leaned down and picked up the key, plugging it back into her clockwork doll. Then after a quick winding, she asks, "What happened?" A series of intermittent cranking noises came from Loony's body, and after a while, some of her parts finally resumed function. "Old Master is looking for you," the doll answers with a very out-of-tune voice from the chest. With a clunk, Lucretia dropped the wind-up key due to shock. Loony turned her head following the sound, instinctively trying to reinsert the key to no avail because her limbs had stiffened again. Lucretia's complexion turned dreadfully white after hearing the word Old Master. She's an absolute mess, but she still has enough wits to pull herself together after hearing Loony's failure. Shaking it off with a shudder, she hugged the doll to suppress the chaotic thoughts and muttered, "Loony, standby mode." The clockwork doll slowly closed its eyes. Command received, Loony going on standby mode. Minutes later, deep in the cabin of the Bright Star, Lucretia was busy at the workbench inside this brightly lit room. This laboratory could be evaluated as complete and advanced, even by the standards of the Truth Academy's headquarters. It's equipped with intricate mechanical devices and pressure pipes used to power various equipment. One could even see magical runes, crystal containers, and reactors shimmering with light among the countless machines. Currently, more than a dozen automatic dolls were currently taking care of these pieces of equipment, allowing Lucretia to focus on the work in front of herself. Right now, Loony was lying quietly on the large workbench in front of the Sea Witch, disassembled for repair. Repair. From Loony's chest came a somewhat out-of-tune voice. Ads by PubFuture. Don't worry. The transmission device jammed suddenly, causing part of the bearing to warp. Lucretia busied herself without lifting her head. It will require a lot of time to repair the area, but the repair itself is simple. Your heart isn't damaged. Loony slowly rolled her eyes sideways to look at the heart, placed at the center of the workbench. It was a delicate floating brass ball made of countless intricate metal pieces set together. From time to time, the surface would change positions to reveal the inner structure, and if watched from the right angle, one could even see the shiny engraved runes swirling around the tiny thing at the center. Well, calling it a tiny thing was a stretch. It's in fact a finger, a very slender and fragile finger. About a toddler's size that's been elaborately crafted by a certain puppeteer a century ago. That's the true core of the clockwork puppet known as Loony, the true essence, the final proof that a puppet born 100 years ago remained in this world. Lucretia noticed Loony's gaze and followed it, causing her hands to stop as well. After a while, she resumed work and spoke as if without intent, "I changed you into this. Have you ever resented me?" Loony, resent. The head of the puppet on the workbench made a dull voice, "Mistress, gave Loony life, for this, Loony is happy. But all this was originally done on my own whim, and for that whim, I destroyed your original body," Lucretia said lightly. "For a long time, I didn't realize you had developed a real ability to think because of the influence of the border. Back then, I only thought you were a machine and carried out many reckless, experimental modifications on you." Loony took a moment to reply, "Your emotions are tense. You have something on your mind. Under normal circumstances, Mistress wouldn't suddenly say such inexplicable words." Now it was Lucretia to go silent for a while. "Do you remember what you said just now? After I just arrived at the deck and woke you up." Memory retrieval failed. Loony doesn't remember. "You told me that the Old Master is looking for me." Ads by PubFuture. A series of strange noises came from the chest cavity of the clockwork doll again, but not due to a malfunction, it's confusion. "Do you really not remember?" Lucretia raised her head and quietly peered into Loony's eyes. Memory retrieval failed. Loony doesn't remember. "It seems that my terrible father didn't want me to have any chance of reverse spying on him." Lucretia had a complicated expression as she said this. "He just sent a unilateral signal, telling me, he knows where the Bright Star is, and he knows how to find me. You're afraid. I'm scared to death, but more than scared, I'm more saddened." "Sad? Why?" Lucretia stopped and met Loony's gaze before shaking her head dismissively. "This emotion is too complicated for you right now. You won't be able to understand." November LBJNN. Okay. Looney will try to understand in the future, replied the clockwork doll. Do you think old master is giving you some kind of warning? I don't know, but it does feel like a warning, Lucretia said softly. In fact, it feels like some sort of declaration before a hunt. He's back from subspace and even more elusive than the last time he returned. Maybe I should remind my brother. You should indeed remind Mr. Tyrion. He had already set out for planned, and the admin of that city-state mentioned the Vanished is near their island. Lucretia nodded lightly and didn't say anything more to continue her work. Ads by PubFuture. Duncan carefully put Nilu back into the antique wooden box before putting the feather-shaped hairpin into the drawer as well. Once done, he kept staring at the wooden box with a worried face. As a grown man, he always felt something was wrong with putting a girly-style doll in his bedroom. But apart from putting it in his bedroom, he couldn't think of a better place. Although the first test failed to achieve any results of Nilu being a supernatural item, this was still something related to Lucretia. If he's not careful, it might open a passage to the other party without his knowledge. After some struggle, Duncan sighed and temporarily placed Nilu's box at the end of his bed. If you really have something special about you, then hurry and show your hand. He glanced down at the box again. Don't be like Alice. I don't want to throw you overboard and see another wave surfing fiasco. The wooden box certainly didn't react, but Duncan didn't care about it either. He came to the window and glanced at the sky outside. Night had fallen today, and the pale and dim glimmer of the giant crack in the sky gave the ocean a shimmering appearance. The mighty exorcism power brought by the sun has subsided in the real world, and those distorted, ominous, and corrosive forces are gradually rising in the world. At this time, humans will enter their dreams to avoid the world's corruption in their sanity. But for Duncan, he had never felt any discomfort in the night, nor had he seen the shadows that frightened the ordinary people. The night was his realm, the time when he's at his sharpest. Returning to the desk, he quietly spread a blank piece of paper out and grabbed a pen from the side. These are things he bought today from the city to write down what he found. After a little hesitation, he began once he sorted through the details. In 1889, a sun fragment appeared, triggering the planned Great Fire. Through Dog and Shirley's help, I found the veiling curtain of the factories inside Block 6. It hides a different reality destroyed by the flame back then. The origin of dogs, humanity, is still unknown, but it is clearly not the influence of the sun fragment's power. There is also a distorted space-time in the neighborhood church of Block 6. It's causing two opposing realities to lapse and superimpose upon the chapel grounds. I suspect the statue of the goddess inside that church is corrupted by subspace, and the nun discovered in the underground sanctuary had likely died fending off the invasion back then. Chapter 166 inches. The captain's waiting in your sleep. Duncan went over all the clues he had discovered recently. Then, through the connections they each had with one another, he reorganized them into various chart groups that are interlinked together. First and foremost, everything inside this world can be corrupted. The only exception is subspace. Second, the reality of this world is built on unstable foundations. The space is unstable, time is unstable, and even reality itself is not necessarily as unshakable as people perceive. Third, the forces of subspace have invaded planned. The vision in the chapel of the 6th block is proof of this. The sun fragment from 11 years ago is probably not the most critical link in the whole event. In fact, the likely culprit is subspace. Duncan placed the pen down and reviewed his three main conclusions. Eventually, his gaze shifted back to the first point, which caused him to recall something he had heard at the bank. Without hesitation, he jotted down the details about the corrupted church in the 6th block on a separate paper. Pollution began with that church, causing two different realities to lapse over one another. It's so strong that even the goddess's monitoring is affected. It's unsure how this was achieved or happened. Was the church itself first contaminated, or was something else inside the cause? At this point, Duncan suddenly remembered what he had told Shirley about blowing this up across the city. With a grin, he turned to the dove pacing around the windowsill and narrowed his eyes. In response, I abruptly froze at the added attention and swung her bird head over, murderous intent. Not minding the wacky phrasing, Duncan snapped his finger and caused a flame burst from the compass hanging around I's neck. The pointer spun and spun, shifting the room's occupants from reality and into the spirit world. As usual, Duncan had come into the dark void that's filled with a billion starlights. Taking a small breath, he calmed his mood and allowed his subtle perception to guide him toward what he wanted. In no time at all, he had come before a small starlight. Even without touching it, he could tell this belonged to the female inquisitor, Vanna. Compared to when he first discovered this star, Duncan could clearly tell his connection with Vanna had become much stronger. Her last visit to Hydas' antique shop had strengthened their bond, and those strengthened connections would now come in handy. Turning his head to face the ethereal eye, the ghost captain didn't even get to say anything before the bird cried out, "Who is calling the fleet? Remember the last time we connected Shirley's mind? I thought for a while and tilted her head. Gotta add money. This time will indeed be a little more difficult. After all, the other party is a devout saint. Her mind should be stronger than Shirley's, and it may also attract the attention of the storm goddess." Duncan nodded slightly but still slowly stretched out his finger and approached the cluster of starlight little by little. But now that the connection between Vanna and me has been strengthened, it should not be a big problem if there is only a shallow communication without causing damage. After all, this is just a righteous complaint from an enthusiastic captain. In the next second, his fingertips touched the starlight. The layers of illusory waves seemed to come from an infinite distance, but they were fleeting, and Duncan didn't even have time to notice the presence of the waves when his mind connected through the line. Vanna rubbed her eyes as she looked down at the thick file in her hand. By the time she looked up again, she was already sitting in front of the dresser mirror inside her room with a tired face. A momentary trance floated up from the bottom of her heart, but she soon shook it off and recalled what she was doing. After leaving the archive with some borrowed documents, she had been investigating the heretical cult materials predating 1889. While there, she and the old priest had discovered some anomalies regarding the lack of information from 1885. Sadly, they could not find the missing materials, which alarmed the Inquisitor here. As the leading figure in the combat against heretical entities in Planned, Vanna had every reason to pursue this matter at the highest level. Firstly, the lady had already arranged for civil priests to search for the files inside the other archives around the city, hoping to extract any information from other sources since the church wasn't the only entity keeping records of the past. She also ordered a guardian team to monitor the heretical places that were affected back then. Of course, she also informed Bishop Valentine of the matter and requested he acquire further instruction from the goddess. That's about everything Vanna had done thus far on a surface level. Until she finished reading through every document between 1886 to 1889, the Inquisitor had no other leads to go on. Sighing at the heavy burden on her shoulder, the lady glanced at the window and toward the giant crack in the sky. The faint glow was soothing to her senses, something she desperately needed under the recent discoveries. Then she glanced back down at the thick files in her hand to find the words starting to blur and become unreadable. Perhaps it was due to fatigue, but she wanted to look away and stop like something's nagging at the back of her head. Wait. No. Vanna jerked to attention. Slamming the document closed, she swung her head like a bat and glared out the window. It's midnight, the most influential time for the world creation and the most dangerous time to read any book or document. There's no way she would take a dangerous historical text out of the archive and read it in the middle of the night when she's so tired. Professional clergies do not make such a mistake. This is not reality. It is your own dream, a dream that is being influenced. Vanna's eyes widened with blood filling those veins. She realized her dream had been invaded by some unknown intruder. As if on cue, the oval-shaped mirror in front of her suddenly started to ripple. From within the reflection came a majestic figure standing quietly in the darkness, the illusory green flame quietly burning on the edge of the mirror. The figure calmly observed Vanna through the mirror, and after finding Vanna had noticed him as well, the being faintly smiled and greeted her in a deep voice. Good evening, Vanna. I believe this is our first meeting, but I have been watching you for some time now. You can call me Captain Duncan. The words did not even get the finish when the female Inquisitor leapt into action. As a trained fighter, she jumped several meters into the air and kicked the dressing table back to put distance between them both. Then without hesitation, the lady drew her giant broadsword out and slashed down in a somersault. Duncan. With a loud bang, the entire dressing table split into two, the mirror directly shattering into pieces by the huge force. Duncan's phantom was also scattered with the mirror shards that went flying. However, this wasn't enough for the lady. Like a finely tuned machine, she clutched her giant broadsword in hand and vigilantly scanned the room like a prowling lioness. She's also whispering the prayers she learned from the main church to awaken herself from a corrupted dream, as per protocol. Your reaction surprised me a little. Vanna's eyes widened as she followed the source of the voice. From what she saw, it's coming from the mirror shards littering the room. Relax, child, I just wanted to talk to you about something, came the voice of the infamous Captain Duncan. It's about planned. Is it the mirror? The young inquisitor suddenly muttered to herself. Duncan. Huh. Without replying to the man, Vanna raised her broadsword into the air again and smashed down with crushing force. Under the loud explosive impact, a shockwave reverberated across the room, sending every mirroring item in the room to dust. Now that silence returned to the room, Vanna spent another minute scanning the room before issuing a long sigh. But then she froze due to what's in front of her. Instead of hiding behind a mirror, the infamous Captain Duncan was now standing openly in her field of vision. November LBJNN. Your guess is not exactly correct. It's not just the mirrors, but everything smooth that has a reflective surface. The ghostly captain's voice directly entered her ear. Now, I'm inside your eye lens. Chapter 167 Inches High Standard Report. To be honest, Duncan regretted it as soon as he said this sentence. He was terrified that Vanna, a straightforward girl, would rip her own eyes out on the spot after his explanation. What do you intend to do? The young inquisitor began, her voice cold as a piece of steel. How did you invade my dreams? Her attitude was hostile, but Duncan only found it funny because it contradicted the polite and peaceful character she used inside the antique shop. I wonder what her reaction will be if she ever learns the truth. Nothing much, merely to tell you one thing, Duncan said bluntly and without nonsense. If you really care about the safety of the city, you might want to go visit the 6th block and investigate the chapel there. After speaking, he closed his mouth and stood quietly with the flames burning around him, maintaining a mysterious and majestic aura. As if something pierced a curtain to reveal the hidden truth, Vanna fell into a faint trance over those words. But compared to this momentary lapse, the reality that the dream was polluted by Captain Duncan touched her heart more strongly. She tried to pray to the goddess in her heart for help, but the power of the goddess could not penetrate this layer of the dream. After a few seconds, she finally gritted her teeth and tried to act calm. You invaded an inquisitor's dream just for this. It's up to you to decide, Duncan said lightly. I'm looking forward to what you will find out there. After saying this, he began to feel his connection to this dream rapidly diminishing. A strong repulsion was at work here. Vanna may appear quiet and willing to listen from the surface, but this high-level female clergy of the church was not one to give up. Instead, she's been mustering her willpower to repel the intruder, and now, she's at the critical point of awakening. This made Duncan realize that the exchange must end as soon as possible. There's no need to give more than what's necessary, and leaving now could keep his mysterious image. As the ghost fire converged to fade away with the captain's figure, Vanna suddenly cried out at the last second. What are you planning for planned? In the end, the lady couldn't resist the temptation. Duncan looked up in the darkness as a sudden devious desire flooded his heart. Make some fries. He utters the most outrageous sentence he could think of before the dream completely collapsed. In the dark space of the void and chaos, Duncan took half a step back to watch the twinkling starlight in front of him. Whatever she's going to think about next, at least one thing is certain. Duncan glanced at I, who had landed on his shoulder, and muttered softly as if to himself. The 6th block, chapel, these two key pieces of information have entered the site of planned Storm Cathedral. Whatever the reason, they will definitely conduct the most intensive investigation there. Duncan's idea was simple and effective. He just needed to lift the lid off the chapel in the 6th block. As long as he could draw the attention of the Storm Church, it didn't matter how Vanna and the priests behind her worked. After all, he's the largest mobile natural disaster on the boundless sea. Those poor clergies would be frantically searching for him. Until they figure out it's nothing, they would pour all their resources into digging up the secrets of that chapel. Finally, thinking back to the last comment he made to Vanna, Duncan couldn't help but grin like a naughty child. Make some fries. I tilted her head in confusion after noticing the odd smile. Carefully mince the meat. Your language is getting more and more fragmented, Duncan frowned, but we can make you some fries tomorrow morning. This is a good chance to teach Alice how to make some normal food. No, Bell, BJN.C. Ohm. Vanna suddenly popped her eyes open. There was no light in the room, only the pale and cold glow of the world's creation spilling through the window as she glanced around. The nightmare had clearly taken a toll on the Inquisitor's state of mind. In fact, even the nightgown she wore had been drenched in cold sweat, leaving her all uncomfortable and sticky. But these discomforts were nothing compared to the sudden intrusion in her dream. Vanna pulled herself up, looked around very cautiously, blinked her eyes slowly, then closed them again before repeating the action several times. Each time, her heart would beat violently as if the ghost captain would suddenly reappear in her field of vision. It wasn't until she finally confirmed the terror wasn't returning that she could breathe properly. It's been a long time since Vanna became so nervous. Getting up from the bed, she swiftly came to the dressing mirror. Unlike in her dream, it's still intact and unbroken. After several seconds of staring, she shook her head vigorously to pull herself together. Then pulling the drawer open, the lady takes out a small dagger with runes depicting the storm and waves engraved on the blade. It's not a weapon meant to harm others but more of a ceremonial item used in prayers. First, she cut a tiny hole in her thumb and allowed the droplet of blood to soak into the runes before praying to the storm goddess. During the brief prayer, she heard the gentle sound of the waves ringing in her ears, and the protection of the goddess, as always, soothed her restless heart. After reconnecting with the goddess, Vanna now truly relaxed, and then she neatly changed out of her sweat-soaked pajamas and into the church uniform. She also picked up the giant broadsword next to her bed before departing the bedroom. Moments later, a private car powered by a steam core broke the tranquility of the upper city downtown area. It's Vanna driving her car to the cathedral. She had to tell Bishop Valentine as soon as possible what had occurred in her dream. The complexity of the matter had far exceeded expectations, and it was no longer an incident that could be solved by her alone. It may even require their branch and plan to contact the main storm cathedral patrolling the boundless sea if necessary. Vanna's gaze was firm on this, her breathing steady and her thoughts clear. But suddenly, a little hesitation came to mind. She recalled the strange scene near the end of that dream. Make some fries, what the hell does it mean? Chapter 168 Inches The warning signs. The sleepy-eyed Bishop Valentine did not expect to find Vanna making a visit so late into the night. However, his drowsiness was instantly wiped away the second he heard the first sentence out of her mouth. Captain Duncan entered your dream. The old bishop dumbfoundedly gawked at the Inquisitor. He's even doubting his own sanity like he's still in a dream of his own. That ghost captain took the initiative to seek you out, just to tell you about a location to investigate. That's right. I know how it all sounds, but you must believe me. Vanna nodded vigorously and didn't beat around the bush. She knew how the old bishop would act, so she readied the story while driving over. The 6th block chapel. The interaction was short, but the most important piece of information is that the old bishop fell silent for a while. He turned around and looked up at the goddess's statue like he's remembering something. Vanna, do you remember the pollution you suffered at the cult site in the sewers? Afterward, we carried out a purification, but now it seems. I get what you mean. Vanna took a soft breath, her expression still flat. It seems that our purification has never succeeded. The vanished is still chasing me, and the ghost captain has extended his power to my dreams. Is clarity still with you? Valentine turned and stared into Vanna's eyes. Absolutely. I tried reciting my name, and the goddesses during my drive here. I also managed to recite the quotes from the Storm Codex. The lady nodded firmly. At present, the pollution is still shallow, and only my dreams are affected. The pollution is shallow but cannot be completely removed like in a retrievable countdown. Valentine's tone sounded grim. You are still the Inquisitor of Plant, and no one can take your place at such short notice. Vanna knew what the old bishop was trying to say. She has been polluted by the powers of a supernatural force. As an Inquisitor of the Storm Church, showing weakness could prove fatal for herself and others in their ranks. Of course, no one would question her faith. That's not a variable in this matter. I can't leave my post. Vanna shook her head after a brief thought, knowing she was giving the old bishop a problem that he didn't want. However, she still had to continue to perform her duties. I have a very bad feeling that we have a real crisis on our hands. It may not necessarily be caused by the vanished or sun fragment but by a bigger shadow lurking within the city. Valentine definitely picked up on the seriousness of Vanna's tone. Immediately frowning. Crisis beyond the vanished and sun fragment. Have you discovered something lately? I investigated some materials inside the archives, which should have been told to you the next morning, but now it seems the situation is more complicated than expected. The urgency needs to be adjusted upward, Vanna nodded and said with a particularly grim voice. I became suspicious of the timing of the sun fragment's appearance all those years ago. After consulting some materials from 1889 and earlier years, I found a large number of less urgent but strange and dense, heretical worship reports. Most importantly, the yearly report for 1885 is missing, November LBJNN. As Vanna spoke, Bishop Valentine's eyes finally widened a little. Ads by PubFuture. These materials were just sitting in our archive. The old priest exclaimed in disbelief, and no one noticed 1885 is missing. That's right. It's as if someone had stolen that part of reality from the city, removing it from the eyes of everyone. Vanna's expression now got dark, and I can be somewhat certain this phenomenon isn't caused by the sun fragment. Valentine tightened his grasp around the scepter in his hand, causing the knuckles to go faintly white. Then what is your take on Captain Duncan's message? Uncertain, but the records show no indication the vanished is capable of stealing reality from us. Secondly, if this is the work of that ghost captain, then there is no reason for him to invade my dreams and tell me this crucial clue. This is not in line with the chaotic and mad style he portrayed a century ago. Vanna calmly analyzed what she knew and deduced the most plausible answer, unless he had a sudden change in his character and became more vicious and devious, or become an enthusiastic person concerned about the safety of the city-state. Vanna spread her hand in the fashion of someone that's unsure. He did come and report his findings after all. Oomph. Please don't make such a horrible joke. Valentine coughed vehemently at the sad attempt to lighten the mood. You always had such poor humor, you know, Vanna. It really makes me doubt your mental state sometimes even on a good day. After complaining, the old priest smashed his chest and straightened that back to prepare for the next step. So who else knows about the abnormality in the archives? Vanna thought for a bit and shook her head. Only I know. I went to investigate the matter myself, but as she said that, the lady paused as if a cog had just malfunctioned. Shaking it off like it's nothing. That's right, I found the files myself. That's good to hear. If there is a black hand pulling the strings behind this matter, then they won't know about us being aware yet. Valentine exhaled at some good news. Do you have a plan for those archives? Yes, including actions with City Hall as well. Starting immediately tomorrow, I will provide you with the church's assistance as well. Valentine immediately nodded. I will also report what happened here to Her Majesty the Pope. Let's hope the Grand Storm Cathedral can provide us with some assistance from their end out at sea. While speaking, the old man thought for a few seconds and asked, Can you still pray to the goddess as usual? Yes, Vanna replied immediately. My connection with the goddess was not affected by that dream. Valentine frowned. But the goddess didn't make a revelation or warning about the spiritual pollution you suffered. Ads by PubFuture. That's right. Vanna hesitated but nodded in acknowledgement. The goddess did not warn me. Valentine rubbed his chin, and after a moment of deep thought, he suddenly looked into Vanna's eyes. During this time, you must return to the church at night to rest. Do not fall asleep outside the church, and be sure to carry the Storm Codex with you at all times when you are outside. Also, if you ever feel unusually sleepy or tired while moving outside, head to the nearest chapel immediately, understand? Absolutely. Alas, Vanna, I hope you don't think poorly of me for making such harsh demands of you. The old bishop somehow appeared slightly older, like he's stressed by the matter. There is no priest or nun capable of replacing you at the moment in planned. As the Inquisitor and leader of the Guardians, you mustn't fall at any cost. Perform your duties as per your vow. As per my vow, always. Vanna faintly smiled but also grew firm in her face like a warrior confronting combat. I know full well how dangerous of a thing we are facing. I will not commit the same mistake my predecessor did when fighting the dark evils in the world. Speaking of this, she paused before continuing, but what about the chapel in the 6th block? We have to investigate. There's no question about it. No matter the purpose of that ghost captain's visit, we must leave no trail untouched. Valentine grimly nodded at the image of the infamous pirate, And, I somehow can't remember who is in charge of the chapel in the 6th block. It's as severe as we imagined. I'll personally lead a team over there tomorrow, Vanna states. Very well. Valentine bowed in gratitude to his peer, but is there anything else that Ghost Captain mentioned besides the chapel? It would have been better if the old bishop didn't ask, but Vanna's expression had turned weird the second he did. Valentine. Why do you have this expression? He did. It's a very strange message. Vanna's face now looked hesitant and unsure. I don't know if we should take it seriously. What's wrong with it? The more bizarre the content, the more likely it is to be the key to everything. Valentine's eyes grew sharp. What did he say? Vanna hesitated for a few seconds before sighing heavily. Make some fries. Valentine. After a moment of silence, the old bishop finally spoke up again. Really? It is absolutely true, as true as my belief in a goddess. Ah, then this is indeed a bit too weird. Chapter 169 inches stepping into the curtain. Do you see? Make the fries like this. It's very simple. Just be careful not to over-fry the potatoes or undercook them. You don't need to stick your head in the oil or taste it either, okay? On the early morning of the vanished, Duncan was busy pointing out how to cook up a batch of fries to Alice, who was seriously trying her hardest to learn inside the kitchen. Remember, she's obsessed with the sizzling pot of oil, ready to make her move at the slightest signal while clutching the kitchen knife in one hand. Duncan looked at the oil pot and then back to the doll next to himself. With a slight nod, he was ready to go do something else when he noticed the gleaming knife in Alice's hand. Can you put the knife down first? You don't have to keep holding it unless you're cutting something. A cursed puppet standing in the kitchen with a knife staring murderously at some potatoes. The picture was unlucky and frightening no matter how he thought about it. The only missing thing now was a spooky BGM in the background. That would be the perfect horror flick. Oh, Alice came to her senses and quickly hid the kitchen knife behind herself. Waving at the captain confidently, you can go back now, Captain. I've learned how to do it now. You and I will get to eat in no time. Duncan stared at Alice for a long time, trying to confirm the doll really won't mess this up. It's no longer boiling water anymore, but oil. If things go to hell, the pot would actually explode and cause a genuine kitchen fire. But as insecure as he was about leaving, everything has to begin somewhere. Heaving a light sigh, he waved goodbye and departed for the deck. Good, I can finally have some decent food on the ship. On the second floor of the antique shop, Nina watched her uncle with a curious gaze while keeping a medicinal bag on her forehead. Uncle, I wanted to ask this before, but why do you keep frowning in the morning? And just now, you sighed like you're suddenly relaxed or something. Was I? I wasn't paying attention. Duncan was startled by the attention and quickly adjusted himself. Smiling at his niece to keep a face, it's nothing. I merely remembered something about the account books. I'm fine now that I've solved it. Oh, Nina nodded, that makes sense then. Duncan didn't comment and left it at that. He's been careless about how observant Nina has become and didn't want to rock the ship. Ads by PubFuture. Shirley didn't come today. It's then Nina said something unexpected as she glanced out the window. Everyone has their own place to live. Duncan almost wanted to laugh at how readable the child was. She's clearly lonely and wants her friend by her side. And you still have school today. Where are you supposed to find time to go out? I should have inquired about her home address, Nina added, that way I can visit her instead of just having her come here. Now that's something Duncan didn't think about. Softening his voice to be more relatable, do you like this new friend a lot? I know you haven't known each other for long. Shirley is a nice person and saved my life in the museum, Nina said immediately, and what? And the place she lives in, I asked Dog about it at night and their living conditions. It's in a small alley inside the slums. There are no night street lamps, and the house leaks when it rains. Nina. Duncan cut the girl off right away and made a stern face. Friendship cannot be based on sympathy, especially for a child like Shirley. Nina was startled by the harsh wording. Raising her head to meet Duncan's gaze, she didn't speak for a good while before uttering a random remark. Uncle, how come your words are so philosophical lately? NOVELBJN.C. Duncan. But you're right, Uncle. I do feel a little sympathetic towards Shirley after hearing about their background. Nina instantly returns to her old self, but I merely want her to live better. I can feel it without her telling me. Although she was always inexplicably nervous when she lived with us, I could tell she was very happy. Am I being too presumptuous by judging her like this? Now it was Duncan's turn to be startled. Honestly, he didn't expect Nina to be so thoughtful at her young age. Shaking his head, it's not our place to decide that, so let's not worry about the matter. Actually, let's ask Shirley where she lives the next time she visits. Now hurry up and finish your breakfast. It's almost school time. Okay. Nina immediately nodded obediently, and then she seemed to have thought of something else that caused her to grow excited. By the way, can I ride the bike to school? Absolutely not. Duncan pricked his eye and answered without hesitation, have you forgotten how bad you fell last night? As he spoke, the scene of what happened yesterday instantly returned to him. As soon as the girl saw the brand new bike, she jumped with glee and wanted to try it out. Then 30 seconds later, in front of the shop, she fell over, hard. Ads by PubFuture. Now she still has a medicine bag on her head for the bruise. I thought it would be easy to ride a bike. Nina lowered her head and moped, I saw my classmates. Duncan sighed. He should have thought of that beforehand. Nina doesn't have many friends outside this antique shop, so where would she have the opportunity to learn? That's a failure on his part. Take the bus to school today, don't run. Our family is not short of this little bit of money now. Duncan rummaged through his pocket for a few coins and put them in front of Nina. I'll teach you to ride a bike when I come back. It's really not difficult. With your cleverness, you will learn it in a few days. At first, Nina was a little frustrated but soon became happy again and nodded happily. Yaa. After a while, Nina happily jogged out of the antique shop while Duncan watched from the small shop window on the second floor. He could see her turning at the corner and towards the bus stop not far away. It's a beautiful morning. He had to admit this despite the various shadows lurking at night. The glistening light of the sun and the permeating noise of bustling life in the form of burning embers through his senses gave the impression of a thriving city with a golden curtain blanketing it. But then Duncan's expression froze when his sight skimmed over a row of houses in the distance. He beckoned to the air and summoned the undead bird from the ship. Next second, a tiny burst of flame materialized in front of his eye and transformed into the dove. Hiccup. Who's calling? Hiccup, fleet. I flaps around in a circle to land on the man's shoulder. Showing a weird face, Duncan turned and raised an eyebrow at the bird. How much did you eat aboard the Vanished? I flapped her wings and cooed vigorously. The time to eat has come, hiccup. Duncan blandly eyed his partner with a face of incomprehensible nature. No wonder Alice was in the kitchen for so long. You cleared out the storage room, didn't you? Forget it, at least you didn't waste the food. Can you still fly to the 6th block? The dove issues out a roaring chip of a commando, making sure to salute with her wings as well. Mission will be achieved. Mission will be achieved. A fireball shot out of the small window in the next second and flew staggeringly toward the 6th block. At the same time, 2 dark gray steam cars were driving through the empty streets deep in the 6th block. Sitting in front of one was none other than Vanna, who had brought along a small team of elite guardians for the investigation. She didn't want to ride a steam spider walker for this trip because that would be too eye-catching. So until she gives the signal, the main battle force would remain outside the block and await her command. Frankly, that's a good idea on her part. She didn't realize it at first, but after coming here, she immediately picked up on the abnormal atmosphere in this area. It's very wrong and creepy, a neighborhood that's too lifeless, a population that's sporadic and unresponsive to outside stimuli, and old facilities that have fallen into disrepair to an unacceptable level. The best way to describe this place would be a world frozen in time and forgotten by its people.